All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott, formerly of Rankin Technical College. And as part of my YouTube channel, Jeff Teaches Programming. And I've been coming through and going through some examples of trying to teach people some Python. This is the URL for YouTube. This is if you wanted to just search YouTube, and that's the associated playlist. Now, in the last video that I did, which will be put out along with this one in just a few minutes, what I did was I wrote a Python program. As it says, it calculates and displays a person's BMI or body mass index. And what BMI does is it takes a person's height and weight, and it says that based on those two features, is the person underweight, is the person of optimal weight, is the person overweight, or is the person obese? Here is the formula, and there's different ways this formula can be written. There's also, sometimes you see this, I did it in the English version, but sometimes you see it in a more European version where they don't use pounds and inches, all right? But this is what I did. So you input a weight in pounds, and that weight that you put in, I put some arbitrary values in there. So the weight must be between 1 pound and 777 pounds. All right, and you put in a height in inches, and that height must be between 12 inches or 1 foot and 96 inches or 8 feet. So as it says, if the input's valid, the program should calculate and display the BMI or body mass index plus a message indicating whether the person is underweight, of optimal weight, overweight, or obese for their height. These are the metrics that are used. If you've got a BMI that's less than 18.5, you're considered underweight. If you have a BMI between 18.5 and 24.9999, etc., so in other words, under 25, you're of optimal weight. If you have a BMI greater than or equal to 25 but less than 30, you're overweight. And if you've got a BMI that's greater than or equal to 30, you're considered obese. All right. As it says in here, I've used constants in the program. You'll see them in a minute. All right. In addition, make sure the program assures that a numeric height was entered, a valid height between 12 and 96. If a value between 12 and 96 was not entered, meaning either you put in nothing, or you put in something that was non-numeric, or you put in a value less than 12, or you put in a value greater than 96, an error message should be displayed. Again, these are arbitrary values. In much the same way, when you put in a weight, it's expected that the weight is between 1 and 777 pounds. If you put in no weight or a non-numeric weight or a weight less than 1 or a weight greater than 777, an error message should be displayed. You'll notice that for height, 12 is the minimum height, so I used min height. 96 is the maximum height, so I used max height. For the weights, 1 is considered the minimum allowable weight, so we have that min weight, and 777 is the maximum weight, so it's called max weight. Again, these are truly arbitrary values. These are constants, and they're constants in that I made them in uppercase, but technically, as I mentioned in the last video, all right, Python does not really support the use of constants per se. Let the user run the program multiple times as desired. Keep track for each time you do program runs of the total number of underweight people you've calculated, the total number of optimal weight people you've calculated, the total number of overweight people that you've calculated, and the total number of obese weight people that you've calculated. These totals should be outputted, but only at the end of the program. Now, I played around with this a little bit, and you'll see what I did in just a couple minutes when I run the program, but I want to go through all of it first. Here's my import statements. I imported math because I used the is NaN or is not a number Python function. We've got OS, and I've got that in there so I can clear the screen. We've got import lib, and that import lib is in here to try to clear the cache every time. All right, to make sure that when we make a change or whatever, we're running the newest and latest and greatest. We also have import time, and as you can see, there's someplace in here. Let's see. Okay, time.sleep. In fact, I'm going to change that from 5 to 3, and you'll see why in a bit. All right, so that time is going to put a timer in, so something will stay on the screen for 3 seconds in this case before something happens. All right, so that's the imported modules. I don't have any of my own in here, okay? Again, these are the global constants, and you'll notice there are 7 of them. Again, I put this up in the last video, but technically the idea of constants is not supported in Python. Just because you put something and make it uppercase doesn't mean diddly. But what that is supposed to be doing is, for lack of better words, kind of be sending a subliminal message that, hey, don't change those values. So you can see I've got the minimum and maximum height, the minimum and maximum weight, and I've also got 3 others. Min optimal, which is 18.5, min over, which is 25.0, and min obese, which is 30.0. And that'll help when I figure out what the BMI status is: underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese. All right. Now, my global variables in here, and there are ways of doing this without making these global, just so you know. But I did use these. These are also known as, in this case, these are accumulators. They are accumulating values. So every time I get an underweight person, I'm going to add 1 to this counter. An optimal weight person, I'll add 1 to this counter. An overweight person, I'll add 1 to this counter. And an obese person, I'll add 1 to this counter. All right. Now, I did put a main in here, and I did try to also take this thing and separate it out a little bit so you can see what's going on. So as you can see, main is, if I go down to the very bottom of the program, and the program itself is about 180 lines, but down at the bottom I call main. So that's going to be the first line that's going to execute in the program. So it's going to look for a function called main, and there it is. So the first thing it should do, as it says, is to clear the cache. How did I find out about that? I went online and looked. All right. Now, probably the hardest part of this program, and it shouldn't have been, but it was for me, was to figure out how to do the height and how to do the weight. And those weren't hard as long as I was putting in valid values. But when I put in invalid values, I had problems. So you'll notice I've got these 2 local variables in main, height and weight. And in both cases, I'm setting height to 0 and weight to 0. Then I'm saying as long as it is 0, I call the same routine for both of these. Input height or weight, input height or weight. The reason that I used the same function call for both is they're both doing the same thing, except in one case it's doing a height between the minimum height and the maximum height, and in the other case it's doing the weight in between the minimum weight and the maximum weight. You'll also notice for a height I'm passing in the number 1, and for the weight I'm passing in the number 2. So let's look at that routine. So here it is. Input height or weight, prompt, which is that prompt that I just showed you, and the number, which is either a 1 or a 2. Then I've got 4 local variables in here. So the first one is called the type. And we'll put in here, whoops, will be set to either height or weight. That's the type. The user input, that'll be the value read in from the prompt. The min, that will be either min height or min weight, depending on whether I'm working with the height or I'm working with the weight. And finally, max will be either max height or max weight. Again, depending on whether I'm working with height or weight. Now, there's plenty of ways to do this program. I tried to do it in a way that was not super long, but that made sense to people. So let's go in. I don't have to do this, but let's just add in a couple of extra comments in here. So this is main, and what this is this is the program driver. And as I mentioned in the last video, and I'll say it again, main should have as little executable code in it as possible, but rather main should be calling routines that are going to do all the work. Okay? All right. So this will, the input height or weight will handle inputting height or weight and validating the entry, i.e. make sure that 1, the entry is numeric, and 2, the entry is within range for the height or weight. Okay, so that's what that's doing. Okay, again, I'm adding some extra documentation in here to hopefully make it easier for people to understand. All right, so this is going to input. When you say input prompt, this is going to set user input either equal to this or equal to this. You'll notice I used F strings, which allow for string interpolation. So in other words, I can put min height, max height, min weight, and max weight right inside of the string, inside of the prompt string itself, as opposed to having to append it. Okay, do we have to do that? Of course not. Just made it a little more legible. All right, then we've got this try catch here. So here's the try, and there's the accept. So it's going to try to go through all this stuff. If the number that we passed in was a 1, or if the number we passed in was a 2, those are the only two options. Why? Because that 1 and 2 is either going to be this 1 here or this 2 here. Okay, I didn't put a final else in there or another elif. I could have, but it should only be a 1 or a 2. If it's a 1, we're working with height, so the min is min height and the max is max height. If we entered a 2 there, we're talking weight. So the min is min weight and the max is max weight. All right. Now what we're doing here is we're doing what's referred to as some input validation. Now I broke this up, and I don't think I had to do it. I could have made this one routine because we're raising the same error, but that's okay. All right, so what is this doing? This says if the input is non-existent, that's no input, and that's non-numeric input. So this is checking for blank or non-numeric input. All right, so we can call that input validation 1. If that's the case, I'm raising a value error. Here, this will be input validation 2, and this will be checking for out of range height or weight. Remember, user input is either going to be the height or it's going to be the weight. And you'll notice, because it's written as a string, I'm converting it here. So if the input was less than the minimum, meaning it was less than min height or min weight, or it's greater than the maximum, meaning it's greater than max height or max weight, again, we'll raise a value error. So this will handle bad input. If we get to the else here, if we get to that else, input was numeric and within valid range. Return it. That's exactly what we're doing. Now, if we raised a value error because either we had blank or non-numeric input or we had out of range input, then we just print that it was invalid, telling them to re-enter, and we're returning 0. So we're either going to return the valid input or an invalid input, which is 0. Notice when we come back to here then, if we returned 0 for the height or the weight, we ask them to do it again. So the only way we'll break out of this is if we have a valid height. The only way we'll break out of this is if we have a valid weight. So once we get down to here, we have both a valid height. So in other words, between 12 and 96. And a valid weight, which again is between 1 and 777. So, as it says here, calculate the BMI. Now, since we made these variables local and not global, our program needs the height and the weight, so we pass them to calculate BMI. And if I go down to calculate BMI, it's very short. It's right here. This is the whole thing. Now, I passed in the height and the weight. I just, to simplify it, I made them H and W. All right. Now, I didn't try this, but what should work, height times height is really height squared. I probably could have also done this as instead of H times H, could have went in H times 2. That should work as well. I'm going to leave it the way it is because my program works. All right. So this will calculate and return the body mass index, also known as BMI, utilizing the formula described earlier. Okay? And this is something some scientist or somebody made up. Of course, I didn't. All right. So we're down to there. So now we've done all this. Now, as it says, print the individual's height, weight, BMI, and BMI status. Well, to print those, they were defined in here, so we have to pass height, weight, BMI, and BMI status. That's pretty simple. So we're going to print those. Did I skip one here? Hold on a sec. Oh, we didn't do the BMI status yet. Let's do that. So the BMI status is going to be either underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese. We need the BMI, so we pass the BMI to calculate BMI status, which is going to be down here. Again, it's pretty simple. Now, we are going to be changing the values of our global variables. So we pass those in using the global keyword, meaning I want to work with the ones. This means that I want to work with these variables that we defined up on top. Those are our 4 global variables in the program. All right. Now I've got a thing here I call status, which is just going to represent underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese. That's what I'm going to return at the end. I return status. So status, when I return it, is going to be stuffed into, so to speak, right there, BMI status. I could have, passed BMI status. There's a lot of ways that this could be done. I thought this was the easiest way. So again, if the BMI is less than 18.5, the status is underweight, so we increment the total underweights. All right? So I could put here in increment underweight counter. All right? If it's not that and it falls down, it's got to be at least 18.5. So if it is that, but it's less than 25, let's move these all over one. Then we want to increment the optimal weight counter. All right. Otherwise, if it gets down to here, it's at least 25. So we want to increment the overweight counter. Finally, if it gets down to here, it's at least 30. So we want to increment the obese counter. Okay? And in fact, let's see, that should be pushed down a line. So should that. All right. That's not needed anymore. And this should go down to here. All right. I think everything is pretty well set now. Again, if anything, I well over commented in here, so you should be able to understand what's going on. All right. So now I've explained. We've been going over main. I explained the input, height, or weight for both the height and the weight, the calculate BMI, the calculate BMI status. Now we're down to print individual BMI info. So that person's height, weight, BMI, and BMI status, which is simply a series of print statements. You'll notice again I used F strings in here to allow for string interpolation. So it should say something like height 72 inches, weight 200 pounds, BMI 27.36, because it should be 2 decimal places, and status overweight, something like that. The H is height, the W is weight, the BMI is just BMI, and the status is ST. We could have called these height, weight, BMI, and BMI status. It would have been just fine. All right. So that is that one. And then we ask the user if they want to run the program again. All right. And it's going to return either false or it's going to return true. So let's take a look at that routine. Again, I'm looking in here. So this is okay. That's making the checks. this then will return one of those values. All right, then we're printing the individual's information. Okay, and then finally, we are going to allow the user to run the program again, if desired, or end the program run now, if not desired. Okay, so again, this thing is a variable we made up right here called do again. And it's going to put on the screen, run program again, enter Y or N, please, and then a tab. Now, it's possible the user just hits the enter key. And if that's all they do is they hit the enter key, I'm going to pause for 3 seconds, clear the screen, and it's as though you answered yes, you want to run the program again. All right? So otherwise, okay, so this will handle right here. This will handle the user just hitting the enter key. Okay, and this I'm going to assume user entered something like Y or N. All right, so what's the first thing we're doing here? We're calling it yes or no, because that's what we told them to enter, Y or N. We could have called it Y or N, it's fine, but we're going to uppercase it. Then we're going to grab just the first character. So again, this will uppercase user input. This will grab just the first character of the user input. All right. Then, if that first character is not a Y, we'll say user does not wish to run program again. All right. And if this is the case, I'm going to cut that again down to 3. All right. If that's the case, the user does. Let's really make this stand out. Wish to run the program again. Okay, that should be 3. Get rid of that. Put that in like this. All right, so we'll give it, wait 3 seconds, clear the screen, and return true. Now, if we returned false, all right, so let's get rid of this for now at least. So if no, or in other words, false was returned, print the values of each total weight counter, all right, or accumulator. All right, we'll call print total counters and exit. We're done. Otherwise, If yes, call main to input the height, input the weight, etc. And that's the program. So when we go down to the last one here for those total counters, now you see I bumped it up with comments to almost 200 lines. But again, we are making these available. So we are making the global variables available to this function. And then here we're again using F strings and we're printing out the functions. Now that's the program. Like I said, in all its glory, about 200 lines. So let's do a file, save all, and let's run it a couple times and see what it looks like. All right. So input height between 12 and 96. If we put nothing in there, invalid input for height, please re-enter. If we put a value that's too low, same thing. If we put a value that's too high, same thing. If we put in something non-numeric, same thing. So those are all being handled now. Let's put in 72 here. That's 6 feet. Now we'll do the same thing for weight. All right, with nothing, invalid input for weight, please re-enter. If out of range, invalid input for the high and low. So you notice all of those have that. So I'm going to put in here 111 pounds, which is an underweight person. So they're 72 inches, 111 pounds. Their BMI, which was rounded to 2 decimal places, is 15.05. Their status is underweight. Let's run the program again. So I'll put in here, yes. Should 1, 2, 3. All right, so it allows us to do it again. So 72, and let's put in 177. There's a person who's of optimal weight. Run the program again. We'll say yes. 1, 2, 3, 72, and 199. These persons should be overweight. Again, you can see they are based on their BMI with their height and weight. We'll run it again. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Finally, let's put in a person that's obese. All right, now I've got one of each. Let's put in a couple more. 2, 3. So there's an optimal weight person. And let's put in one more overweight person. Okay, so now we've got, I think, 1 underweight, 2 optimal weight, 2 overweight, and 1 obese, if I counted right. There it is, 1, 2, 2, 1. There's your program. I'm hoping this makes sense to people. Again, this will be out there in my folder, and my folder is going to be called Python, BMI, and Payroll. Earlier, I did come in and I added my own module here. Close this. Let me clear this. And let me get rid of this. Where from that calculator, I took out all the math functions, put them in their own module, and then included that module in the regular program. And that cut the size of my program down. So again, we've got 45 lines of comments here, but the whole thing, and there's some comments here, the whole thing is only probably about 40 pounds now. 40 pounds, 40 lines. And now I have to preface each one of those with the name. Okay, now you notice it's JPS and not JPS Math, and that's because I used an alias. In here I said as. If I hadn't said here as JPS, then I'd had to have said JPS Math for all of these. Okay, that's it. When I come back, I'm going to write several iterations of a payroll program going from very simplistic to fairly complex. Okay, I'll see you with those in just a bit.